Okay, so we're back again after our little hiatus. We took a little European August for the most part, I
Yes.
think, here. And I'm Jen Brazelli.
I'm Kyle Godby, and we are joined by Kyle Soo today. Kyle, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me here today. So it's going to be a bit confusing when you talk about Kyle, which one
Oh,
Yeah,
someone's to
it's gonna
figure
be
that out.
great.
yeah. So please introduce yourselves, or introduce yourself, Kyle. Would love to hear like what you got going on. And
Yeah, wow. I always get stumped by this question because it's one of those classic ones where I've sort of got different hats, so it probably depends on the context. So
Mhm.
uh, I'm kind of exploring at the moment this kind of big question, kind of like how I suppose some of these questions around like complexity, how to be regenerative, kind of translates sort of to the day to day, and how maybe we can explore that in kind of like local communities and within organisations, teams, businesses, um, especially like looking at creativity, play, and imagination based stuff. So my day to day existence is working within the B Corp movement. So if you're familiar with B Corps and the idea that businesses could be done better, and things like that. That's kind of my sort of 9 to 5 existence, so to speak. But outside of that, I do lots of weird and wonderful things, which I can talk about a bit more. So I suppose predominantly I'm a Lego series play facilitator as well. So I sort of trained up just before the pandemic, and yes, I had to move all of my work online, which was interesting to play Lego on Zoom. But essentially, like looking again at like play-based facilitation methods as well, which is pretty cool. And I think that's kind of spun off in lots of different directions and intersections there as well. Prior to all of that, I used to work as a criminal lawyer for an organisation called the Serious Fraud Office. So there's been this sort of big shift in some respects from sort of like this sort of way of being to sort of this more sort of like design creativity kind of existence over time as well. So I think at the moment I'm still sort of trying to sort of pull these different threads together, sort of like try and find a coherent pattern with what I'm up to and like looking forward to the future and things like that. So yeah, I'm sort of treating this as a bit of a pit stop to kind of explore some of these questions today. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Good. That's a
Good.
that's a perfect use for this kind of a conversation. Is there a
Fair.
coherent pattern among all those things?
Um, I think so. I think when I'm looking back, um, when I was going, when I was sort of rewind back to probably when I was about 10 or 11, I really wanted to be an architect. Um, so I was that kind of kid that would sort of like take bits of cardboard, sort of like PVA glue, and sort of like build stuff, and that was my existence. And I really loved doing that. I was like, I really want to go into somewhere sort of creative. And then I did one of those tests you do at school, which tell you what job you should do. And I think I was the only person who ever actually took it seriously. And I did it, and they said, "Oh, you should be a lawyer." And I looked, I was like, "Oh yeah, lawyers can earn quite a lot of money," and that was sort of the main driver, um, which is obviously something to sort of reconcile with. But sort of like throughout my school, I sort of school time I was kind of looking at subjects that would align more with that, like maths, English, history, and politics. And so I was drawn to that. And then when I was during my sixth form time and going into university, I did law of politics at university, and I got obsessed with constitutional reform, like electoral systems. And I was like, I don't know why. There's never been any particular calling, but I think what it boils down to is the rules of the game. And the idea is like, how do people come together and sort of build structures, systems, rules that guide how we work as a collective and not kind of, in the most part, kill ourselves. And so I think when I'm sort of looking back at the time as a lawyer, I also did a sabbatical looking at social innovation back in 2017, and looking at the social and also a bit of the environmental side, and more recently with B Lab and the B Corp movement. Again, it's like how do we come together, and what was kind of the sort of the dominant patterns that sort of guide our particular behaviours. And I think critically what I'm looking at is how we change that, or how we begin to change that. And I think it throws so many different questions and approaches. So I think it has been, as I say, the relationships bit, which I think is kind of the one word I'd boil it down to recently.
Again and again, I talk to people here we have somebody that we're talking to, or my usual just this person looks interesting on LinkedIn. Let's have a coffee chat, and or we ended up in the same interesting session somewhere, Complexity Lounge or something like that. And it starts with some of that question, like how did you end up here? And at first I was like, this is an interesting trend. Now I'm like, I think this is it's not a prerequisite, but I am. It's enough of a stereotype that I'm going to hear somebody has gone from one direction, one position, one interest over here, and that was 20 years ago. And then something happened, and 5 years later, their situation changed, and now they're in a place where you'd say, this seems totally detached, but I promise there's a link in between, that it is very distant over there. And then it's multiple hops, and generalist is almost like too cheap a term, is how I'm thinking about it now. Like I think we don't give enough people credit for being generalists. That's a little bit too much of an exclusive club. But there's something different about what I find in this community. And hearing your story, where it is, I started in architecture, I ended up in politics and law, and then facilitation, and play and relationships and rules being the connective tissue. And yeah, like there's something different there. And I don't know what it is. And I don't know that it's exclusive either, but it's such a cool pattern in this space to hear how many people are coming into it from very different directions, the stuff they bring from those different directions. So you're also, well, I'll get into some of the nerdier stuff than that a little later. But yeah, I thought I had a question. No, I was going to go into the nerdier stuff. Jen,
go ahead. Just take it where you want. Go ahead. I mean, well, let me wait here. I'll inject this because it's semi-related, and then we
there you go.
But when you were just talking about folks who've kind of, hopped around, so to speak, I get. Obviously, I'm a little reluctant to like talk about like a type of person who comes in.
Sure.
Like, are you a complexity person? Like, we're not talking about that. None of the three of us are mistaking this for that kind of thing. But I think of the word polymath. Or I once learned that the word multi-potentialite gets used in this way. It's a little different than like the colloquial generalist, right? Which itself, that word has been so watered down and kind of weirdly weaponized in some ways. But, and I think there are a lot of humans out there who are polymaths, who may not be the kind of people that want to show up on a chat like this, or who end up, working in any kind of systems-oriented way or anything we usually talk about. But there's a difference in that it isn't just bopping around and getting exposure to different things. And it's generalist gets set up as the opposite of specialist sometimes. But I think the idea here is to have multiple deep, or immersive periods of time in particular fields or places. And then the process by which you start to maybe retroactively find some coherence, whether it's, like you're laying the story of relationships and rules on top of that, partly because we just asked you to do it. You know what I mean? You might be able to tell a totally different story in a different case that like links all these things together for some other reason. But I think the willingness to do that maybe is one of the things that is differentiated here. Other folks might just say my career I had to follow the money. I had to follow the skills I had to follow, and again, I don't think those people are any less reflective or, conscious of something than we are. But anyway, that's what I hear in this. So I guess I'm curious now, Kyle, like take it to the nerdy question that you want to get into. But I wanted to lay down the polymath thing, just to throw it out there in the soup. So.
No, that's good because I spout things, I think out loud, and then you weave it together really nicely. And I think what I heard a little bit in that is maybe the specialization that we might attribute ourselves for us. Like I consider myself, one of my specializations is seeing connections. And I'm hearing something similar in your story, Kyle, and that's not a role in this world. That's not a category in the economics of Western culture that makes any sense whatsoever. And so I can't put on my resume, or I can't walk into an interview and say I'm a connector and have that relate to anything that has a salary attached to it, but it's still a bit of a specialization. And so instead, we have to take that specialization and translate it into something that is viable. And maybe that's an interesting way of thinking about it, to spin that around. I don't know, before I jump, Kyle, what are your thoughts?
I think so. I think there's definitely a thread there around, I suppose, the recognition, realization of that for oneself, kind of vis-a-vis sort of like the system, because I can't compartmentalize myself into a box or sort of answer your question, say, in a sentence, because it's kind of like weird and rough and patchy. You ask me this question tomorrow and I'll say a completely different thing. I kind of feel like it's a failure on my part that I'm not able to categorize myself. Obviously, I'm challenged on a particular narrative around categorization, but I think we live in a world where people like to be, or like to categorize, or a system that likes to categorize because it's easier, simpler, more comprehensible. And I think that's where there is the tension I find around that, and like having to sort of like don different masks or sort of dance between these different things as well. So yeah, that's something I'm sort of still trying to navigate. I think if you're looking at my LinkedIn profile, it's like all the stuff I just sort of list out as sort of massive ream of stuff, and hopefully there's a hook there that someone will kind of latch onto for a conversation. So I think there's something there that when you were talking around like sort of polymath, and I was thinking around like kind of interdisciplinary as well, and I think for me, I've talked about this before, but I like the word like smushing together, and sort of like taking one thing and another thing, and sort of like, what are those kind of intersection points there where there are some similarities, but something else can spark. And so I think there's definitely something there about a pre-established sort of rule set or constraint and how far to stretch it. I don't know if I'd sort of class myself as a rule breaker, because I think this is probably another therapy point around like deference to hierarchy and things like that. But I think certainly within the bounds of constraints, like that kind of question. So, okay, what happens if you tweak this? And what I'm thinking about when I say that is, because I've obviously talked about Lego before, but the Lego stores have this like pick and mix wall in them, which is incredible. I found these little pieces once, and I started putting them together. And this was probably about 2011. I was putting these pieces together, and before you know it, this is like kind of like weird spirally structure that I'd built. But it was because I'd sort of like taken a piece and sort of not put them together properly, and they were bending and weaving, and they were quite snake-like. And I created this structure, and I had a real moment of imposter syndrome at that point, because I was like, I didn't plan it; it just came. And I was like, because I didn't set out to create that structure, I didn't feel like I could sort of be proud of it, because it just happened, and because I'd not sort of like come up with a pattern, drawn out and done it, it just felt not mine. And I think obviously now looking back, it's an emergent process of creativity, sort of like the constraints of the bricks, the time, the consequences of those particular moments coming together as an emergent property. But at that moment, I was sort of struggling with that. But it's just interesting that sort of plays out at different levels, where it's sort of taking something that's structured and slightly tweaking and seeing what else comes about, I think is again another sort of guiding sort of thread through the work I do.
Yeah, it's interesting the side bit there about, you couldn't give yourself credit because you didn't architect it in advance, or you didn't have a plan or an intention that
Mm.
matched the outcome to then say, intention A, outcome A, boom. Like, not you personally, like this is a thing you do. It's like we all do this. This is part of
Yeah,
being
yeah.
human, right? But it's an interesting. There's probably an interesting rabbit hole around intention, maybe for some later part of this. But I did want to mention, because you were talking about like, yeah, interdisciplinary, or even post-disciplinary. I think these days is like the other phrase that people start to talk about. Like let's just abolish the concept of like disciplines in general, which
Mm,
we
mm,
can come back to that later. But it occurs to me as I think about some of our shared, like I know the three of us for sure, and many others, the shared experience of kind of wanting to give someone else some kind of like purchase. If I'm talking about myself or my work or anything, helping them. So, you said like, I'll give a different answer tomorrow, but part of it is this pressure to either categorize or to give the other person or people a way to grab on to what you're telling them about yourself, whether it's a thread that connects things or an organizing principle about your motivation, like whatever it is, categorization or otherwise. And I do the same thing. And like sometimes, it sounds like the organizing principle for me is this, and then other times it sounds like it's that. And the reality again is that it's kind of like it's retroactively applied, right, based on context. But
Yeah.
it raises for me, just listening to you talk is making me think about like the times where I either don't do that or I don't have to, or I'm able to kind of buck that expectation a little bit and choose not to, and what you get when you let other humans do the, figuring out of how things connect. So like if I ever, back in the days when I would still be interviewing for jobs for other employers, and I'd have to do the thing where I connect the resume, just you've I'm sure like had the same experience, like, oh, okay, lawyer, and then this, like, and to sometimes to have the luxury of not having to explain how physics, education, design, systems, whatever, how they, like, if I don't connect them for the other person, what their inkblot Rorschach test, right? What they project onto it is such a luxury or like maybe privilege to be able to elicit from a human. And I'm just sort of curious. I've never really thought about that too much until listening to you talk about it right now. But I feel like it's an incredible, maybe almost like sacred privilege when you don't have to do that for someone, which then gives them space to project their own understanding of what connects things in yourself. And have you ever, is this something you ever think about, or is this is me just right now, but either of you, like, how are you feeling about this concept? Because I'm suddenly like, gosh, I wish there were more. I understand why we have to give people a little bit of a foothold or a red thread. It's part of being human, to make some meaning together on something or give people an orientation, but maybe we don't.
No, it's weird. I don't know if I'm necessarily sort of answering the question, but I was pondering, like, probably over the past couple of weeks and certainly this week as well. And I don't know if this is going to sound really sort of self-indulgent, but I don't necessarily mean it this way. It was more for out of an intrigue, but
frankly, you already sound like a self-indulgent. Like this is ego on display right here. So you're not just lean in, man. Kyle Soo, everybody, the most egotistical person we've ever talked to on this show. So.
But I was interested in like creating some sort of like survey to send out to sort of like close friends and see like how do they perceive me in the world. I would just be interested sort of like what words or phrases they would notice, because at the moment I just think I assume what they think of me, and I think just having that perspective is probably similar to like the Johari's window kind of thing. But I was just interested sort of like a targeted question to somebody just to kind of get that feedback. And it's not necessarily like market research or anything. It was just more like, oh, that's interesting to see what other people notice and have that additional perspective. I suppose I'm also inspired by 360 performance reviews, which I don't really necessarily like, a bit rubbish. But like, I think that concept of like just having that invitation for someone to reflect, I think was something. So I've danced around there a bit, but not activated it.
I have two thoughts. So first, I've done that experiment with a friend who wanted to ask the same question, and we used SenseMaker, and she went out to maybe 8 to 10 former colleagues, bosses, friends, that sort of thing. And the prompt that she asked was, imagine the problem that you're working on now, that you've brought me in, and now write the retrospective of my involvement in it. Now, I think there was a lot of interesting pushback from people that have a lot of experience with SenseMaker, saying that there's just too much hypothetical in that, and that it really doesn't ground very well. But for her purposes, she was just looking for some of the language that people would use to articulate her value from how they knew her in the past in the context of what they're facing today. And so it wasn't really about what's the sentiment, what's the sort of observation of the system, so much as just a provocation of how would you talk about these sort of things. And then the signifiers around it were really about questions that she had, that she gave some space to let people dial into. And so that might have been a little detached also. But ultimately, I think it was a completely different intention on how to use SenseMaker in that it was so hypothetical. But it still had some interesting responses. So I'm happy to share that with you at some point, because I've got the demo probably in my account somewhere. But
Like still set up with the questions.
I'm certain it's in there somewhere. Yeah, it's got to be.
This is funny because it's reminding me of like, because I've done things like this too, in very informal ways. In the early days of Instagram, so I'm an old, but like in the early days of Instagram, when they first introduced the like questions feature where you can like give people the little like reply box, this thing went around where everybody would basically ask whoever you were friends with to like answer whatever, but like a word of description. At that point in my life, my Instagram network was mostly friends and like some colleagues who I would consider friends. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been connected on Instagram. And so I remember doing this, and I remember being like, what's like one or two adjectives that describe me? Like, this is almost at the other end of the spectrum from the example that Kyle gave, because it isn't asking people to envision a scenario, to either remember a scenario or envision a future scenario, or to make any kind of like speculative kind of like assessments or judgments. It was truly like snap, like adjective. When you hear Jen, like what's your word association, right? Like in the Jungian like unconscious way. Like, and I didn't even know if anybody would do it or respond to it. I got like dozens of responses because it was in the early days of that feature, so everyone was like playing with it. But it was really illuminating. It was really illuminating. So like, I don't know that you could do this on Instagram today, but in whatever other fashion you could do it, even as simple as literally asking people like, what words do you associate with me? Because there are the things that you think about yourself. There are the things that you're triangulating from the way people respond to you. Obviously, the version of us that lives in every single other person's head is not at all us. Like, you know what I mean? But it was really interesting because I got things I expected and I got things I didn't. And most of them, because it's friends and it's Instagram, it was all positive, or at least it was like filtered to be something that wasn't like critical. But yeah, it was really illuminating. I'll also say this just as an aside. I don't know if we've talked about this on here before, Kyle, but there's this one particular test out there. Like it's in the style of like the various personality frameworks that are all garbage. I think it's called Fascinate. God, I don't even know if I want to say names of things, and like, this is not an endorsement, just everybody. But I remember somehow this got on my radar, and the whole premise behind the Fascinate thing is that it's not about your personality or your motivations or your inner anything. It's supposed to be a way to evaluate or assess how other people experience you, like outwardly. But the thing is, it doesn't ask other people for their opinions of you. Like, you basically answer a handful of questions, and then this is supposedly based on like a bunch of research and like bazillions of interviews and market research and whatever. So the point is that there's correlation that it's building on to get the output. The idea is that you answer questions about yourself based on how people interact with you, and then it basically is telling you what about you fascinates other people. So this whole thing, if you were to go to their site, which if you guys are listening, you'll go to their site now, I'm sure, and you'll be like, ugh. It's all like in the service of like, what's your personal brand? Blech. But I remember when this came on my radar, for whatever reason, I was like really like, ew, dumb. I'll go ahead and take it. Like, this is so weird. I was so curious, So I like hate.
What an odd response.
I
don't like this. Let me spend some time on it.
That story of my life. That looks really gross. I'm gonna try it. Like, that smells really bad. I'm gonna try a little piece. Like, that is Jen Brizelli in a nutshell. So I was like, this looks stupid and like garbage. I'll take it. Take my $50. So I did. And I don't remember my results offhand. They have like a framework of like, I forget, there's like 8 or 10 They're names. They're dumb names for things like mystique and like power and confidence or whatever. But my results, I remember reading my results and being like, this is horseshit. This is so stupid. And I shared it with a bunch of my colleagues at work because we were doing this as part of work stuff, and with a bunch of my friends. I was just like, get a load of this. And they all wrote back to me, actually, this is really spot on. This is how we think of you, or this is how people see you. And again, because this is a framework that's built with a positive lean, like none of them are bad. So it's never. So
Right.
for me, it wasn't like, yeah, we all think you're like an arrogant monster. Like it was whatever the positive framing of all these traits are. But it was, again, illuminating. Not like I didn't take my results as gospel after that to be like, well, everybody thinks that I'm a whatever the things were. But it was like, oh, yeah, okay. So like that triangulation process, whether you just ask someone to put an adjective in a box on Instagram, or whether you do a sense maker collector, or whether you pay $50 for like a weird, hokey, totally not valid test. It's just interesting. That's all. You should take the Fascinate test, and you should do a sense maker collector, Kyle, and report back.
Yeah. $50 actually. Yeah. Okay. It is interesting though, isn't it, about like the draw of these different tests? Because I've said this before in previous conversations. Like, I know all the question marks over things like MBTI and stuff like that, but I still am drawn to it.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. We talked about this a little on here before, but
Yeah.
like, none of them are valid, with a couple exceptions. But
Yeah.
they can still be useful.
I'm thinking about. I've been listening to a lot of C. Tai Wen lately. He wrote The Score. He's big into philosophy of gaming, and he was talking about metrics, and his definition of metrics I really love. He was saying it's the way that we decontextualize things for the ease of communication. That's kind of what we're talking about with anything from MBTI to the how do I name my role. And really, to answer your earlier question, the privilege is almost something that I depend on. That I can look at a role around, say, organizational effectiveness, and send them a resume that has service design written all over it, and they can say, interesting, I wonder what a service designer could do in this context. But I don't draw that connection. I don't retranslate service design into continuous improvement or organizational effectiveness or anything like that. And I've been navigating that for years I need to stumble over that person that understands a few different things, a few different languages, and can do some translating into their own world. Because for me to decontextualize or depersonalize, which is what that real question is, to get into those categories, that introductory, how do you introduce, what's your story? It is to make that accessible to anyone without asking them to make those jumps themselves. It is to say, let me fit into your boxes. And I don't really know what your boxes are to begin with, but let me attempt by the broadest boxes imaginable.
Yeah.
But it's a personal question, which is so interesting. We're asking a personal question, but can you please depersonalize this so that I can understand it? Tell me about you in a way that is less about you and more about me.
Is it really depersonalizing though? I mean, it doesn't have to be. I
No,
think
it doesn't.
It's more
It
about
certainly
like
doesn't.
drawing like the connections, Like sometimes it's more to say this is me, or this is what I do, or like, I have my background includes like law and Lego serious play and, helping organizations become B Corps. And those are all personal in that they are me, but then to say, okay, but some of the connections I've drawn are that understanding rules and constraints and what things are, hard boundaries and what things are mutually agreed upon, porous, principles or whatever. You can almost, I think that's the thing that is so intriguing, is that I don't think it has to be depersonalizing and totally decontextualizing to abstract something a little bit. Like, I know the actual definition of like, if we abstract something, we are decontextualizing it to some extent. Like we can get into like Boyso's like eye space on this if we need to, but I just feel like that's the place where so much of this type of work and thinking like has to operate at some level where it is still personal or locally, contextually colored, but has I just can't. It's hard for me to describe this, but I literally in my mind's eye when I talk about this imagine something down at ground level, and then like these lines that like go up into the clouds, like the basket of like a hot air balloon, and then like the things with the hot air balloon above it. Like it's such a weird image, but it's like the local on the ground in the basket or whatever, and then the things that actually like provide little channels or chutes or little capillaries through which meaning could like travel up into the larger, more abstracted cloud. So enough of my fucking weird stuff on that, because I just not
glad you said
going on there, but you guys carry on here.
I'm just glad that you used a vehicle as an example there, because it is mobile as well. And as you were introducing yourself, Kyle, we're still talking about your introduction 30 minutes later, and so that's the impact of your introduction here. I kept seeing.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, because I often have introductory conversations with people. I think one of the things I sort of do on the side is like I have an open Calendly slot on a Friday that anyone can put time in with me on a Friday morning, which has been incredible. Like just intro, because it's similar to this. There's no structure, no expectation. Just starts with like, how can I help you, and then it goes from there. And oftentimes the introduction takes 25 minutes of a 30-minute call, and it's 5 minutes. Oh yeah, I've covered everything, and so. I think the leaning into the, how it starts to evolve, I think is incredible. And I struggle in certain other meetings where everything's very fixed and it's very agenda, because it feels like it's quite structured. But I think what I try and do more often now is create those kind of unstructured spaces. I'd much rather go out if I'm meeting someone for the first time, like, let's go for a walk and just sort of see where it goes, both in terms of actually the physical. The journey and also what emerges from that, because I think it's that relating. And I think the sort of depersonalization, I think it probably depends on the context. I think I've got a good read on somebody when I interact with them, that I can sort of get a sense of what kind of how they're going to be showing up in this. It's like, oh, this person doesn't have a lot of time, doesn't really care, so it's going to be this condensed version, or is this person's actually, oh, it seems like they're mentioning something here, these are hooks I can draw upon and like have a 75% introduction, first question, and then we get into nuts and bolts of it. So I think my kind of heuristic is like a good relationship is how quick I can get onto the subject of societal collapse with someone. And I think it's like I think my record is about 3 minutes. And I think then it's like, right, okay, there's so much there we can like go down as well. But yeah, it's been an interesting exploration now about just the volume of new conversation I've had to have with people over time.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Get on Kyle's calendar for Friday mornings and make the subject societal collapse. And hot right on that topic, and you're good to go.
You've just skewed the whole experiment now, because you've exposed it. How quickly can we get there has now become the topic. I do want to hear more about that, though, because I just realized that's another pattern. And Jen and I talk about this, and we've got our own calendars open the same sort of way. We just want to, like, this person seems like they're doing interesting, let's talk. And we talked a long time about how I run out there and I try to find people, and Jen just somehow they land on her. And so we've got, I'm the magnet on the stick, and she's the magnet.
A magnet sitting still. Still to this day, the dumbest metaphor ever. Anyway, go ahead.
It's so it like I can visualize a magnet on a stick and what it would do. It's like what roofers use to clean up all the nails, right? It's perfect. Great metaphor. So it's another pattern that I'm seeing out there from folks in this network community line work, the attractor. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your retrospective of like installing that and what you've gained from all of that, or how you might critique it now.
Yeah, I mean, I think I need to give credit to a guy. I think it's Andrew Griffiths from Planet Mark, who put me on not necessarily the precise structure, and I think other people do things similarly, but I remember sort of like in terms of the origin story, because I've got a partnerships role at B Lab UK, and I just get lots of emails from people trying to sell me stuff, and I was talking about how to manage time, and you said like, oh, I've got this. I use Calendly as the app. I've got this like particular slot on a particular time of day, and it's like if anyone wants to do this, they can use that specific slot. And I think it was an extension of that. So okay, what if this was just completely open for anyone to talk about anything, and just try that as an experiment? And I think again that's what I'm trying to do more of. It's like it doesn't have to be sort of like planned out specifically. It's just put something out there in its shortest form and see what happens, and build from there. And yeah, it's been going for 2 odd years now. And yeah, it's been really good. And sometimes people join and want to sell me stuff, but it's like that's the rules of the game, And sometimes we can have a conversation about something interesting there. And so, I think the first one was I ended up talking about racism in the Nordics, and then and another one, someone was trying to talk about an app about mindful eating, which was like a watch app which would buzz you whilst eating to remind you to chew your food properly. And they talk about food waste. Like if you don't chew your food, it just goes straight through, and you actually don't get the nutrients, and there's food waste there as well. So these like things I would never have like experienced throughout it. And then others, it's just people asking for support on sort of like CVs, job direction, and things like that as well. But yeah, I think the lean into the unknown, I think, has been really demonstrative. And what I've evolved it into, actually, to talk about sort of the retro, is that I don't do it on camera anymore. I just say it's on a Google Meet thing, but I say kind of just got off camera and let's go for a walk. And I think that's the other element as well. Is actually one the reason I actually set this up properly to get to it is like I needed help getting up early on a Friday morning. So creating accountability to someone else was helpful. So as people as an alarm clock, but also as an exercise method now, because I don't think we always need to be on camera for everything, and so I think that opportunity to get out, go into nature, get your steps in and all that kind of stuff, and also I think the physical process helps with the mental processing as well. So that's kind of the recent build on it. What's been lovely as well is when I put a ping out on LinkedIn to get people to sign up, other people take the idea and do it themselves. And so I've seen a proliferation of that more recently. Although it was interesting, one guy did do it, and he fed back to me. He said, "Oh, he had a conversation with someone, but he said it was boring." And I was like, "How does that happen?"
Paddling on yourself. That's what you're doing. If you ever have a boring conversation, that's on you, friends. He's gonna say it. It's kind of being a dick to say it, but yeah, no, it's what an interesting experience though. If the entire concept of sort of having this open, unstructured time and just making it available, is when folks first try this, if like one of the first experiences is not a good one, like what do you do from there? I joke that like that fellow should. I've had those moments too, but like after a while you start to get to a point where you're like, man, I can find something interesting almost anywhere, unless a person is truly like not responsive, in which case why did they book time with you? Right.
Indeed. Oh, well, I mean, I should say it was a person trying the experiment for themselves, not a conversation with me. Yeah.
I also flippantly kind of an asshole about it, because I was like, well, nobody. If you ever have a boring conversation, it's your fault, person who I don't know who is, like right. 2 steps removed from me, and with But
I suppose we don't know the full picture. But it was just interesting, because I think I had a similar thought process, like how and why that happened. I think the other thing as well, which just in terms of like an emergent benefit from this as well, is it's an opportunity to rehearse.
Yes. Because it's also scary, right? On on a small level, I think that something like this, what we're talking about, this like unstructured time for meeting, can be a little bit of like a microcosm of everything on the bigger picture that we talk about. And the notion of having a space be unstructured can be a little scary, and you still feel the instinct to either apply structure, or you feel pressure as like a host or as the person who made the time available, that you have to guide or steward the conversation. That like if there's dead air time, it's awkward. It's on you to have good questions or to take the conversation to a meaningful place, which may or may not be what happens, because somebody might come into that call with ready to go and it's an whatever on its own, it's self-propelling. But say it happens, say the person comes in and they kind of stare. I've had this happen where someone was really gung-ho to get time with me. We get on the call and they're just staring at me doing the cartoon blink 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 blink, and I'm like, what do you want to chat about? And it's just blink blink, and I'm like, awkward silence. But you only get comfortable with it through repetition, through repeated exposure to that. And so it creates a little safe sort of sandbox microcosm. But it is scary. It is scary even on that small scale, I think, for folks to realize you feel the pressure to navigate and steward something like that, and to like not do it is
yes,
hands off part is like whoa for a lot of folks.
Well, I think even like obviously you've kindly invited me to participate, but I should say like all this week there's been like a fear
Yep.
about showing up, and you set this up in a loveliest way. And you've said everything that could be said to make happen, but despite all of the stuff I've said, like there's still like I feel like a self expectation to how to show up, how to talk about these things, and I think that the approach I've got is like when there is a moment of like tension, lean in rather than lean away. It is kind of part of the exploration or the inquiry that sort of I'm working on at the moment, which is why I'm obviously not running away. But it doesn't go away, certainly. So I just wanted to sort of air that out as well. But it is challenging.
Yeah. Well, I like that you just said it doesn't necessarily go away. I think that's also something I found, and I think others too, that repeated exposure or the repeated reps that you get comfortable with doesn't mean that you don't stop also feeling either, whether you'd call it fear or whether I don't know what you'd call it, pressure or whatever. But it's like that concept of like do things scared. Like don't wait till you're not scared to do it. Just learn to do it through the fear, in a bigger sense, or like other worlds. But it's the same idea. So I really appreciate you saying out loud too, because I know this has been true for every one of our guests. There's a little bit of like, ooh, like Kyle and Jen, like have invited me to come be on this thing, but I know it's not really like this podcast. It's more casual, but gosh, just because it's casual doesn't like remove the level of pressure I feel to put a good face forward or to say things that are meaningful or to like, look, either from a vanity perspective, I want to look good. I want to sound smart. People are going to hear this. And from a value exchange and a human to human relational kind of thing, I want this to be reciprocal. I want to hold up my end of the bargain. Like these pressures are real. They're always on and they don't go away. And I appreciate you articulating that out loud right now, because I think every single one of our other guests, past and probably future, feel that as well. And we maybe just don't talk about it enough.
I think if I may just sort of, I think two points out. One about the mentioning, and I think one about panel discussions. I think on the mentioning, I've got a good friend called Carl Quinn who we were in another setting. It was like an in-person form thing, and we had a fishbowl exercise, and he went into the middle, and he said this is, he just called out like the weirdness or the awkwardness or the challenging space, and I think we need to. I think the more that we are open about how we're showing up properly, I think there was like a collective side of, oh thank God, because everyone else was feeling that, and like, it just took one person. I think it just changes the dynamic. So I think there's something about that which I think is resonant there. And I think the other thing which I was just thinking about again is sort of the lean into with this is so often I kind of go on sort of like do like panel discussions and stuff like that, and the usual setup for this is you've got the event that's going to happen, and then the sort of the preceding weeks you have the pre-meet, and oftentimes I find the pre-meet much more interesting than the actual panel discussion, because you've removed some of the structure and there's like a rawness in that conversation. Like, that's what I'd love to see on stage. not the performative element there as well. And so I feel like this is almost like akin to the pre-meet to something else.
Yep.
So again, I'm appreciative of the structure you've put together today to try and enable that.
It's great to hear that. And I'm gonna tie this into Lego in just a moment. But I wish I could say that I was intentionally, like, I would say cringy shit and dumb shit on here, as a way to like lower the bar and the pressure of like it's the sort of why am I forgetting his name? The sportscaster I always
Madden.
connect myself to. Thank you, John Madden. It's the John Madden sort of like just yeah, like the every guy football fan deserves to be here kind of thing. But this is sort of what we do in facilitation also to sort of open things up. That like that opening. Let's draw something stupid, the squiggly birds, or I'm gonna like everybody draw a clock kind of thing. It really brings everyone to that same human level of some people are artists in different ways, or they just draw in different ways, and so like the pressure to get on a board, stand in front of everybody, same as if you were like sharing your screen and trying to type in front of people, like it's just heavy. And so I love those mechanisms that say, how do we not depersonal, deformalize things so that we can get comfortable and we can. I hate. I'm not. I'm trying to dance around safe space because that's not what I'm trying to talk about at all. It sounds like it's funneling that direction, but that's not it. It is really rehumanizing spaces that have been formalized outside of sort of normal. I think just human baselines. And there's something really interesting about Lego, and I've participated. I've never facilitated any of those sessions, but the ability to just take something that has a rigid, simple set of rules and then abstract using that is a really brilliant connection. And so, unless there's anything we want to keep on in this, I'd love to sort of sway into that, using this as a bridge and hear some more about not just Lego, but the other play techniques that you're using.
Yeah, I can do, definitely. Yeah, so I'm assuming that you know about Lego serious play. I'm just sort of broadcasting it to everyone.
As a participant.
But yeah, as a kind of the concept. But like, yeah, I think, how did I find out about it? I think I was pottering around on the Lego store as you do, and I saw this whole section on Lego Serious Play. And I thought, what the hell is that? And it was just like a load of like expensive Lego pieces and random bricks. And then I started to find like facilitators who were doing it, and sort of looked at some of the. It was like the classic thing: oh, you can do a training course, get a certificate, and all that kind of stuff. It's quite expensive. And then found someone who was doing it, and just sort of got into it. And it wasn't like, oh, I've got a game plan. It was just like, I like Lego. I like design. Let's see what happens. So that was kind of the entry point into it, and yeah, I think there's so many different things about it which I think appeal to me, which I can talk about, like how I've been doing it in the past, and then also the sort of the future state, because I think you sort of say a lot like D something words then, and I think there's something around demechanization as well, which is sort of linking to the sort of theatre of the press stuff, which I can talk about as well. But yeah, I think the essence with sort of the Lego Serious Play, just to explain, just for context setting, is like you're working with groups of people to use Lego as a tool to help them share stories with each other, and so the Lego bricks are there to help, I suppose, literally sort of build a story. Or a narrative there. Michael Fern, who's written a book about it, talks about like 3D printing for the mind, which I quite like. And essentially, like there is a constraint and a structure there. There is a kind of a set pattern behind it, which is essentially the facilitator will do some setup and really like explain some of the rules, because oftentimes people come and say, I've not touched Lego since I was a kid. I'm not creative. All those really like sad phrases that people use. Like, where did that? What happened in your life? That sort of creativity, sort of like you feel it's sort of dissipated. But yeah, so it's saying it's not a competition. It's essentially the Lego bricks are there to serve you, not the other way around. And essentially, people will come together in small groups. I'll ask a question, and then people will build a model in response, and then each person has probably about 3 minutes or so to build a model. So it's really, really fast paced. And it's also trying to get people to the flow state. The cheek set me high, if I said it correctly. But yeah, just that slight stress, but also sort of it's still doable in response. They'll build a model, and then each person has a couple of minutes to share the story of what they've built. And I think the key thing behind it is that it's a combination of like the physical bricks, of which like there's loads of combinations, but also the imagination and sort of So it's saying like you just picking a phone here, but like this looks like some ordinary phone, but if I said that's a spaceship, you can imagine it's a spaceship. So just sort of saying like you can ascribe a story to bricks, and then yeah, people share the stories and you sort of capture it, and then you can sort of do other variations of it. But I think the thing that really appeals to me about it is kind of about the democratization of storytelling, because oftentimes I've been in rooms with other people where you've got like a really like dominant force, and I sort of shrink back. And I think so often there are people who will be probably more introverted or sort of depowered who will sit back. It's like you're just losing so much sort of diversity of thought and stuff like that as well. So the opportunity for each person to sort of share stories, I think, is really important. So that's kind of the main draw. So I've been kind of experimenting with it over the past few years. I think there's definitely been a spike in terms of interest in people engaging with it and sort of being trained up recently. And I think what's been lovely about it is it was listed in a participation playbook that the Greater Manchester Combined Authority was doing. So there's a book which has a foreword by Andy Burnham, our Prime Minister, saying like, "Oh, we should follow this." So that was quite a good thing. But I think it's used as a participatory tool to work with communities alongside things like legislative theatre and like ethnographic research, like trying to sort of engage people in different, again, more playful, imaginative ways rather than just a standard survey. I think is really important. So I think that's an interesting direction it's going in as well. I'll pause there if there's any questions, but yeah, I can talk about like where I'm taking it into the future as well.
I just find anytime I encounter folks who either do work with Lego Serious Play or at least have some level of fluency in it, maybe they're not facilitators, but they've got some interest or adjacency to the work, I always am intrigued by the role of like the Lego blocks specifically versus like say any other kind of physical manipulatives, right? Like go out and buy like pipe cleaners and little material, which again at the end of the day you could do this with almost anything physical, like that I know to be true. But I have found, because I am not like trained and certified in Lego Serious Play, but I'm not I play one on TV kind of thing. Like I've read enough about it. I would never actually claim that I am someone who is as knowledgeable as you or others who've been trained in it directly, but my entry into a lot of similar forms of making and generative hands-on participatory work was through Liz Sanders, who I was exposed to in grad school, and she's got the one book, I think, Convivial Toolbox, but similar ideas, adjacent, not the same. Her stuff kind of leans more into like generative research, discovery research rather than storytelling explicitly, but these things overlap a lot. But I bring this up because I think there's something intriguing about literally the Lego blocks and not just what they are and how they're designed and how they do and don't fit together, and all the different types of pieces that are out there for it, but the like role that Lego has in people's lives. So like you could do the exact same exercises and activities and facilitate the exact same process with the Legos and with a set of, again, other manipulative things that I've used over the years. Just, you go to Michael's and buy a bunch of stuff from like a crafts kit, and it's just random little things. And you get great outcomes and wonderful things either way. But like, I'm really curious your experience as someone who has done this for a while and has the expertise with Lego. Like, what is the difference? Is there one in your mind, in your experience? Does it make a difference? Does it not? Like, why is Lego special in this way?
I suspect it's because people have experienced it. So there is like a harkening back. Well, it's quite expensive now, but I think there's definitely sort of push more towards like adults. I like buying kids, so it's not like, oh yeah, I used to do this 20 years ago as a kid, and it's bringing back. It's like, oh, actually, I was playing with this yesterday, kind of thing. But I think there is that. Yeah, I think there's definitely something in the familiarity, and also I think the I think the way that they go together, literally, I think there's sort of the tactility, it's the sound. There's an ASMR like album that you can get for like Lego, which is horrible, but you know, some people are
Amazing.
but you know, I think there's those particular points, and I think it's the accessibility, and also I think there's probably the constraint element as well, and actually, you know, bricks can only go together in certain ways, and I think oftentimes I have to remind people, like when they're sort of building stuff, oh, I'm not finished. And I was like, well, when in doubt, metaphor it out, you know, because they can just pick one brick. There's a really good picture I show people about a Lego competition, and one of the entrants is a literal 1x4 brick by a kid, and this just a worm. And I was like, yeah, of course it's a worm. And I was like, that encapsulates that point. So the imagination you described to is powerful. Then it's the inspiration from that particular thing. So I think it is leaning into probably all the narrative marketing around like Lego of itself. It's interesting though, because I've got a list of experiments that I want to run. And one of them I kind of crudely call like post-apocalyptic Lego, which is like, could you do Lego serious play if there were no Lego bricks anymore? Which is kind of more of a nature-based exercise. I was like looking for like a group of people who are willing to go out into like a forest and say, do exactly the same, but they'd be picking bits of twig and pine cone off the floor and sort of trying to construct something. I guess the disadvantage is that you can't physically put it together, so you might have to think a bit more creatively about that. But my hypothesis is that you can do it with anything. Well, no, I don't. I think it's kind of proven out from what other people are doing. But I'd just like to sort of see how that would land, especially if there are people who don't like the plastic elements, wants it to be a bit more nature-based.
I love that idea. I'm just laughing because I feel like that's what my childhood was. For some, and that's not true for everybody.
Yeah.
But back to all the times I spent, you know, in the woods doing exactly that, making shit and taking, you know, telling stories about it with my friends, right? So, but even the one brick worm example, I love that because one time, and I always show this photo when I have to introduce this too, when I was doing something similar, but it wasn't with Legos, it was with sort of a set of little like buttons and things that were, again, just objects, abstract objects. But it was for a project that was related to healthcare, and the person basically just had like a single little bead. It was like one bead or one button, and they attached like a long little strip of paper to it, and that was it. Everybody else is like, you know, making really and they're like, this is this and you know, and this thing, the story they told about it. I mean, I'll spare the long details, but it was essentially like, I need this thing to know everything about me and help me predict the future about my health, like at its heart, right? And so like that bead means nothing. It is literally just giving somebody a vehicle or a container in which to actually pull the like tacit out and make it explicit, but without having to flatten it in making it explicit, because it's an object and a metaphor and a story. So it's so intriguing. But I think your point about the constraints, the enabling constraints of how Legos fit together is something that Legos or similar sets of things offer versus me just going down the craft aisle at Michael's. And I have both now, and I've used both. Like there are times where I've used the more kind of open-ended construction materials, and there are times where I've worked with Lego kits where everybody has the same like kit of Lego bricks, the serious play kits, you know, and it's been interesting to see the differences. So I love the idea of doing it in the woods. I'm curious to hear what other experiments you have in mind that you want to run.
I'll get my list now. I should also add, like, the methodology is open source.
Yeah.
And so I think that's critical. Anyone can do this, and I think if you've got the facilitation experience, you can do it. So I think this idea that you need to kind of go out and be certified and stuff like that is, I think we need to move beyond that. Okay, so I've got experiment one, which was smell. So I was because I thought, well, actually, we touched on most of the senses, right? So would smell have any effect? It did not. When I tried, and I was sort of tried to pipe in pine fresh during the thing, which I think it was just a bit too overpowering. Doing stuff with 3 horizons as well, so that's been an active experiment as well. So I think what this demonstrates is there's lots of other methodologies out there. And I think one of the things about sort of the Three Horizons framework is when you're asking people to imagine the third horizon, like what that potential future could be, the use of imagination, imaginative tools there helps. So that's kind of borne out, but something there. I've been experimenting live. Sorry, I should say there's 9 here. I'll just pick and choose. Don't worry. Ideal Present, Dr. J. Bloom's stuff. I think it's been quite good. And yeah, I think the other ones, which I'll probably draw on because I think that's more interesting, is probably around the improv and legislative theatre stuff. So actually, coming back to that point, how about the demechanization stuff? If we can dwell on that a bit. So Theatre of the Oppressed New York released a wildcard workbook, which is like an incredible resource. And they talk about demechanization games, which are essentially, when you sort of go to some in-person stuff, you get around in a circle and you sort of play some games. It's sort of sometimes like the zip zap, kind of like theatre stuff. But they've got other ones, and I think I talked about this with you in the past, but there's one called Colombian Hypnosis. Mm-hmm. It's like, if you want a hook in any conversation, which I find is incredible, just ask someone, have you heard about Colombian hypnosis? And
right.
Instantly, you've got someone's attention. But it's essentially where you sort of pair people up and like one person puts their hand in front of the other person's face. It's obviously consent-based, and that other person moves the hand around, your face goes with them. And you might start walking around the room, and you can start to chain it together, and you kind of get this weird, like, relational model. But the critical thing is, once people have gone through that, you ask them, like, where else have you felt that before? So if you're a central person with 2 hands out there and you've got other people on the fringes moving down, that's like any other organisation. CEO says one particular sentence and it's how it's interpreted at the fringes is completely different, how it skews the organisation. So I think the association of the embodied practice to lived experience and an exploration of power, I think, is really powerful. I was like, this should be part of like service design training, because to me that's how you'd actually feel it, and I think that's the point. I get even talking about it, I feel it now.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, I never get that with a post-it, do you? And so I'm really interested in, like, if we can combine some of these kind of like demechanization games with a group of people at the start, it might sort of introduce some of these questions, these concepts, these sort of vulnerabilities, which would then help with the Lego Serious Play session, which is starting to kind of like turn these feelings into ideas and action as well. So I'm going to be trying that hopefully in the next couple of months with some organisations around Bristol as well to see where that goes. So we'll see.
Okay, I'm interested. I think that you're spot on with the sort of accessibility or the sort of affordance that Lego brings. What I keep seeing the couple times that I experienced Lego Serious Play, again, I wasn't the facilitator, but I was part of a workshop that I was facilitating in. We'd sit down and we'd say, okay, we're going to map a thing. And I'm sure there's somebody that can explain what parts of our brain are activating and the difference between recall and represent the mechanics of a process or an organization or something like this. And people would go into sort of not necessarily performative mode, but when you get multidiscipline or multi-domain, you're cross-functional in your workshops, everyone's there to represent a larger part of the organization. And so they go into that sort of ambassador mode of, I need to show up in a particular way for everyone else. But I remember there was one particular workshop where we were asking people about, and this is before I understood sentiment really well at all, and we were just asking, so what does it feel like? What's the actual experience of this? And nobody was in that mode at all. They could not, no matter what, everybody felt something about it. But they were standing in front of the whiteboard and they're drawing a swim lane or a process map or a flow chart or whatever, and they're just like, nothing's coming to mind at the moment, is what I heard a few people say. And the next day, as a sort of icebreaker kickoff, we were supposed to do something with Lego, and we said, all right, let's ask them that question again about, now let's look at the board and what's something that comes to mind. And they all went into this like deep, like they were like putting ink blots together in Lego. They had this real abstract expressionism in what they were building, and then they had to sit down and articulate why they put it that way and what everything represented, and that was more effective. That's probably 30-minute exercise in understanding how things actually worked and how those experiences related to each other, or the people sitting across the table, than it did trying to connect all those lines and boxes. Not that those lines and boxes weren't playing a part in that, or that they didn't have function afterwards, but it was such a key component to bring in the... you can't just ask somebody, switch to a different part of your brain now. But the Lego is there, and what I've tried that in other ways, using the whiteboard and the Sharpies or the Post-its, and that resignation of, I'm not creative, I'm not an artist, happens. It's so much more widespread and happens so much faster with the Sharpie and the Post-it note than I feel like I've seen it happen with Lego. I have definitely seen my share of adults that don't know Lego and have kind of like looked at the bag and gone, what the fuck is this? Why would you hand me Lego? We're adults here. Are we going to play? What's going on? But within minutes, they're deep into it, and it's kind of amazing to watch.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to know, though... Oh, no, go ahead. I want you to respond to that.
No, I was going to say, when I'm about to start a workshop, I'm one of those people saying, what the hell am I doing with my life? And so but as soon as it starts, there's other people that like trust the process. That's one of the rules I've got. And it's like, as soon as I start to see the stories come through, it's like, oh, thank God, it's not like a blip. It is actually something there. So I continue to go through that skepticism.
Yeah,
but sorry,
that's good though. No, that skepticism's healthy. Which is probably what is giving you your experiments. How do I shift this just a little bit and integrate curiosity of my own into it? And so this is where I want to hear a little bit more, because I've seen you put stuff on. I think maybe we talked about it last time. I jumped in on one of your Friday sessions, but I've seen you post this on LinkedIn as well. I want to know what you're doing with Warhammer 40,000 in relation to all of this. Like most people, I found Warhammer 40,000 through the first Bolt Thrower album. I'm sure that's how everybody found Warhammer 40K. But I was one of those kids that we got the books and we got a couple of models that we never painted, and we had grandiose ideas and we just never did anything with it. So I've never actually experienced Warhammer 40K. So I'm fascinated. Have you played, Jen?
No, I played actual Dungeons and Dragons.
Same.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, but
that was so much
the
more
snobbery
accessible.
comes in.
Right.
You know? I'm just joking.
No, the
Kyle,
40K folks are on another level altogether.
I file this away for the next time it's just you and me on here to talk about like modern day Dungeons and Dragons like popularity and like various tensions around stuff, because I think there's an interesting tie there. However,
I agree.
Yes, go.
Yes.
I want to hear Kyle's response.
So, 40K.
Well, I think it probably would be an expansion from 40K to Dungeons and Dragons more widely on this. So I think I've been doing Warhammer since I was a kid. You know, as a classic. I'm drawn more to the painting and sort of like the craftsmanship of the practice of creating. Obviously, going back to what I was talking about at the start, and so less about the actual game. So that's one piece. But I go to wargaming conventions. I went to one recently called Salou, and there was a panel discussion there from people who were talking about wargaming. I'm sort of familiar with wargaming as like a risk scenario. I think there's like various books about it and stuff like that, isn't it? Like what if scenarios. And I'm also kind of again linked to the theatre stuff, quite interested in immersive theatre as well. And I think it's like, how can we create situations and scenarios where we actually practice the situation and then see what emerges and falls through that. And so it was a really good panel discussion talking about this, because there's one person there who runs this thing called like Flight Commander. So essentially I think you pick a role on like the Starship Enterprise, but it's not that for IP copyright reasons. But like, you could be the captain, you could be the engineer, you could be the science officer, and then they play out different scenarios. And one thing they say is like they've got to keep the immersion really, really important. So if the captain goes, oh, we need to speak to the president of Earth, there'll be someone on the other side who will actually pick up the phone as the president of Earth. They don't say, oh, sorry, you can't speak to that person. And so, like, the deep immersion, like, really stuck with me. And there was someone else talking about doing war games, but they would pause at a certain moment and say, okay, you know, this sort of military situation, tell exactly what's going through your mind at this particular point. And so for me, it's like how those situations where we're sort of projected into those actual moments and practicing, that's the real test, rather than the sort of the hypothetical, what would you do in this situation, or what did you do in the past? So that's the draw for me, which I think is, and I've never actually done Dungeons and Dragons, I need to start doing it a bit more, but I watch a lot of people who do it, which is a weird hobby, isn't it? But I think there's sort of like Dimension 20, all those like stuff like that out there, and I think that's fascinating because to me it's like live improv, and so and around storytelling, and so just to see like the speed at which people react to situations and come with ideas and stuff like that, the storytelling, it draws those different threads together. So I think the genesis was in kind of like Warhammer 40k, but like Warhammer 40k to me is just like glorified chess. Whereas I think the extension of that, we sort of like decouple it from, you know, the win and lose element to it, to like a collective exploration, navigating cooperatively a particular challenge, and the randomness of that coming through. It's like, well, that's kind of like real life to me. And I don't think that's a profound like insight in any particular way, but I thought actually the practicing of that collectively could be in applied in so many other different situations as well. So that's kind of like what I'm quite interested in the moment, is like where that would intersect, because it feels to me again the disciplinaries. There's a whole load of people talking about wargaming and scenario planning over there and risk mitigation. The whole load of group of people talking about like regenerative places. It's like, what if these people like met and see what happens if we actually practiced some of the challenges we've seen today? And I think the final point I'll just add to that is, and come back to societal collapse, like this particular, we're living in a time of crisis, and I wrote about this like last week, but the challenge I see is like we don't relate enough, and I feel like there's a challenge. If there is an emergency, do we have the muscle memory to act in concert with each other in a neighbourhood level to respond to those emergencies? Because we're so atomised as a society, like I hardly know my neighbours, and so, you know, that's a challenge on me to actually reach out, but it feels scary. But I think the more that we can actually practice being in a relationship and activating those particular muscles, that when the time comes we can think, oh, we've done this before. And so it's not just some sort of far-flung kind of thing that the Department of Defence does. It's actually what we do at a neighbourhood level as kind of like practice. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment, which is why it's kind of interest.
Yeah. Man, there's a lot of good stuff there around,
Yes.
you know, emergency slash mutual aid, emergency response, kind of.
Yeah.
There's a kind of a whole tide pool of stuff there. But to your point about practice, like we're talking about practice, but it's like there's practice that has to happen in the sense of having muscle memory ahead of time, or making it so that the barrier or the energy cost of that mutualism in the time of greatest need doesn't feel as high, because some of the friction in that has been reduced by previous exposure and practice and reps, right? So like the muscle memory metaphor like is there. But the other piece of it is the other form of the word practice. Like, it's not practice to get reps in a low stakes practice and then in the game your body knows what to do. It's also like the ongoing practice of the relational, mutual, reciprocal stuff. Like,
Yeah.
two different forms of the verb, I guess. And I find that really intriguing. I'm alluded to both, but I thought I would just call it out because it's very striking to me. Those two, you know, they feed each other, and I think sometimes we accidentally just think about one or the other, but not both.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah, go ahead. I was about to say, I feel like we're getting close. We've got a couple minutes, but we don't have to hurry up and wrap. But I just thought I'd do a promised time check, and you know, if there's more that either of you guys want to draw on in the last couple minutes, obviously do it.
There was so I just got off a cruise, and so this is a little fresh in my mind. And oddly enough, before getting on the cruise, we stayed at a hotel for a night, and then somebody pulled the fire alarm. And I was really impressed with how my kids, who are 5 and 6, we're on the 3rd floor. Like, all right, we're gonna like. This was at like 9 o'clock at night. They're already down for bed. It was like, all right, they're awake. We're up. It's time to just like get our shoes on and walk out the door calmly. And everybody kind of like walked out the door calmly and went downstairs. And they do fire drills at school, and they also do. They don't explain them as active shooter drills for 5 and 6-year-olds, but essentially they are. And so, like, the alarms going off were just fine with them. We all kind of, everybody was calm and just walked downstairs. And we didn't know that there was no fire until after we'd been sitting in the parking lot for 20 minutes or so. But it was through that practice and repetition that got them there. And then the next day, the first thing you do before you leave on a cruise is they do their muster drill, and you have an assigned spot, and everybody has to go stand in it for a bit. And you're there like 45 minutes almost between walking through the lines and getting to where you actually are. And everybody's complaining the entire time. Like, can I just get on with my vacation? There were a number of people with variant disabilities that their families are around them, and they're complaining. Like, do you know how like annoying this is for some? And man, I was working so hard and I kept myself as a quiet observer, but like the importance is knowing how these things go, the familiarity, everybody like standing in that spot together and being a little bit annoyed for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or so is actually an important part of the process. And knowing that if I was with somebody that had some sort of disability or special needs that needed to be cared for in that process, that it was all accessible. It was all doable. The whole thing wasn't going to fail. I wasn't going to have to go do something novel and throw the entire thing off. We all knew what instructions looked like and we could act, and we weren't now trying to be creative and resourceful, which in my work with risk management and process and that sort of stuff, the idea of being creative and resourceful is everything that the organization wants you to do, except for the risk management folks and legal, because that's the incredible variance that they have to fix. But that's also what the sort of stuff we look for in transformation when we're in a sort of liminal space, somewhat liminal space, and as well as in some sort of emergency or recovery. So it's kind of fascinating to. I haven't really thought much about that, but both of those things just happened on top of each other to kind of identify that. But that lack of context. I saw a movie from the 70s not long ago, and everybody is walking past a newspaper stand picking up their newspaper, and then there's another scene shortly afterwards, and everybody's sitting on a train or in a cafe and everyone's reading the newspaper. And the first thing that jumped out at me is like, that shit doesn't happen anymore. We don't have the newsstand where we all sit down and read the same newspaper and get access to the same language and hear the same stories the same way. And not that there's a one way of knowing things and one language or anything like that, but that one unifying component is a relic at this point. So it's kind of fascinating to think about where that tie-in might be.
Well, you can manufacture it through various forms of terrorism and governmental decision making. We won't,
to an extent,
we won't do that for now, but I have very cynical thoughts on that angle.
Let's go down that rabbit hole. What were 9/11 or the bombings in London? How did people respond to that? Yes, it's something we experienced, but what were our assumptions and prejudices and expectations afterwards is a whole other story altogether.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, Kyle, take it here, because we like to give the guest the last word. So, I mean, no pressure to say anything brilliant, just more if there's anything else on your brain. We want to give you a chance to have the last couple words, because it's been really awesome, to have you on here just to chat about everything. But now's your chance, if there's anything else.
I was just going to add COVID to Kyle's point there as well. I think just that reflection, kind of like, again, that yeah, I think there's something there about that as well. I think, yeah, kind of in closing, well, one, thank you, much gratitude for the space and the questions and the time to talk about these things. I think for me that sort of the guiding questions that I've been exposed to a lot of things like complexity, systems thinking, and I think the concern I've always had is like trying to sort of like learn theory, engage with it, and stuff like that is can always be quite challenging. There's so many books and things like that, and so to me, sort of my reaction is about coming back to that word practice, and I love that idea as well, like practice in the two senses as well. And so for me, like that's where it comes alive. And I think what's probably been demonstrated throughout kind of this conversation today is about just getting one's hands dirty, but with other people as well. And I think that is what I'm eager to do much more, and like how we can sort of play with sort of the established rule sets and tweak things and sort of create the enabling constraints is kind of what really activates and engages me. And I think, you know, there's an open kind of invitation calls, like if you think about the same thing, let's keep the conversation going between all of us, because I think that the more that we intersect with each other, you know, I've learned so much from both of you and others. It's been incredible. So yeah, let's keep it going.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
feelings mutual.
It's so cool.
Well, thank you. Can't thank you enough. This has been a good one. I mean, they're all good, so I don't want anybody to feel bad if we didn't say that to them. I always
That last one was a little dicey. This is a great one, though.
I always get to the end and I'm like, gosh, everybody we talk to is so cool. So anyway, I'm gonna hit stop and then we will go about our days.